My name is Serafina, and I'm 28 years old. Last Christmas, my father literally threw me and my beloved grandfather out into the snow because we embarrassed his new perfect family. What he didn't know was that Grandpa had been hiding a secret worth 9 figures for decades. By New Year's Eve, Dad was on his knees, begging for forgiveness, his trophy wife was packing her bags, and I was holding the keys to an empire that would change everything. But getting there nearly destroyed us all. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this Christmas miracle turned into the sweetest revenge imaginable. Growing up, it was always just me, Dad, and Grandpa Joe after Mom died when I was 12. Dad worked double shifts at the factory while Grandpa raised me with his old world wisdom and endless stories about the good old days. Grandpa Joe was my hero. This weathered man who taught me chess, helped with homework, and somehow always had $20 for ice cream runs despite living on Social Security. Everything changed when Dad met Brittany at a company Christmas party 3 years ago. She was 35, blonde, and had 2 kids from her previous marriage, Madison 16 and Tyler 14. Brittany worked in marketing and drove a leased BMW, always talking about elevating the family's image and making smart social connections. Within 6 months, they were engaged. I tried to be supportive. Really, I did. But Brittany immediately started dropping hints about how Grandpa Joe's presence was cramping their style. She complained about his old stories, his simple clothes, and how he watched Jeopardy too loud. She convinced Dad to renovate the basement into a separate living space for Grandpa, essentially banishing him from the main house. It's for his privacy, Dad explained weakly, but we all knew the truth. The tension escalated when Brittany's kids moved in permanently last spring. Madison immediately claimed my childhood bedroom because it was bigger and had better lighting for her Instagram photos. Tyler took over the family room with his gaming setup, making it impossible for Grandpa to watch his evening shows. When I protested, Dad just shrugged and said we needed to blend as a family. But Grandpa Joe never complained. He just smiled, patted my hand, and said, "Patience, sweetheart. Truth always comes to light eventually." By December, the house felt like enemy territory. Brittany had redecorated everything in stark white and gray, eliminating every trace of our family's warmth. She threw elaborate dinner parties for her marketing friends, serving expensive wine and artisanal cheese, while Grandpa ate canned soup in the basement. She convinced Dad to trade his reliable Honda for a flashy truck payment that stretched their budget thin. The breaking point came 3 days before Christmas. Brittany announced she was hosting her company's holiday party at our house, the same night as our family's traditional Christmas Eve celebration. When I mentioned our longtime tradition of Grandpa's famous chili and Christmas movie marathon, she laughed coldly. "That's so quaint," she said, checking her manicured nails. "But we're adults now, Serafina. Time to put away childish things." Dad stayed silent, avoiding my eyes as I stared at him in disbelief. This woman was erasing our entire family history, and he was letting her do it. I found Grandpa Joe in his basement room that night, quietly wrapping a small present in newspaper because Brittany had deemed his old wrapping paper too tacky for Christmas morning. My heart broke watching this proud man who'd served in Vietnam raise Dad as a single father after Grandma died and worked construction for 40 years, being treated like an unwanted burden. "Grandpa, this isn't right," I whispered. "You shouldn't have to live like this." He looked up with those wise blue eyes that had guided me through every childhood crisis. "Sometimes, Sarah, the universe has bigger plans than we can see. Don't you worry about this old man." Christmas Eve arrived with a vengeance. Brittany's party was in full swing upstairs. Champagne clinking, forced laughter, and the sound of expensive heels clicking across our hardwood floors. Grandpa and I huddled in the basement with leftover pizza, watching It's a Wonderful Life on his ancient television, while the ceiling vibrated with party noise above us. Around midnight, one of Brittany's drunk colleagues stumbled downstairs looking for a bathroom and started making jokes about the family hobbit living in the dungeon. When Grandpa politely asked him to keep it down, the guy got belligerent, calling him a freeloader and suggesting Dad should put the old man in a home where he belongs. I lost it. I marched upstairs and confronted the guy in front of everyone, telling him exactly what I thought about his disrespect. Brittany's face turned scarlet as her perfect party atmosphere crumbled. She started shrieking about how I was embarrassing her, how Grandpa and I were dead weight holding back their family's success. That's when Dad finally spoke up, but not in our defense. Standing there in his expensive new clothes that Brittany had picked out, surrounded by her shallow friends, he chose his side. "Maybe it's time we discussed other living arrangements," he said quietly, not meeting Grandpa's eyes. For everyone's sake. The room went silent except for the sound of my heart shattering. Brittany smiled triumphantly while her kids smirked from the stairway. These people we'd welcomed into our home were celebrating our exile. Grandpa Joe stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite everything. "We'll be gone by morning," he said simply. I wanted to scream, to fight, to make Dad see what he was destroying. But something in Grandpa's calm acceptance stopped me. There was a quiet confidence in his voice, almost like he'd been expecting this moment. As we packed our belongings that night, I kept waiting for Dad to come downstairs and apologize, to realize he'd made a terrible mistake. But he never came. By dawn, we were loading Grandpa's old Buick with everything we owned, officially homeless on Christmas morning. Standing in the driveway with snow falling around us, I watched Dad peek through the curtains but never come outside. Brittany appeared beside him, her arm possessively around his waist, making sure he stayed put. She'd won completely. But as we drove away, I caught sight of Grandpa's face in the rearview mirror. Instead of defeat, there was something I'd never seen before. A small, knowing smile that made me wonder what other secrets this remarkable man might be hiding. We drove in silence for an hour through the snowy Christmas morning streets until Grandpa finally directed me to a storage unit facility on the outskirts of town. I'd never been there before, never even knew he had one. He produced a key from his wallet and led me to Unit 47, rolling up the metal door to reveal something that made my jaw drop. Inside wasn't just storage, it was an office. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space, surrounded by filing cabinets, a state-of-the-art computer system, and walls lined with certificates, awards, and photographs I'd never seen. But what caught my attention were the business magazines scattered across the desk, all featuring the same company, Morrison Development Corporation. "Grandpa, what is this place?" He settled into the leather chair behind the desk, like he belonged there, suddenly looking less like a forgotten old man and more like someone important. "Sit down, sweetheart. It's time you learned the truth about your old grandpa." For the next 2 hours, Joseph Morrison, not Joe Miller as I'd always known him, told me a story that rewrote everything I thought I knew about our family. 45 years ago, he'd started a small construction company with his best friend, building houses in developing suburbs. Through smart investments, strategic partnerships, and an uncanny ability to predict urban growth patterns, that little company had grown into one of the largest development corporations on the East Coast. "But when your grandmother got sick," he continued, his voice growing soft, "I realized none of that mattered compared to family. So I stepped back, let my business partner buy me out with the understanding that I'd remain a silent investor. I wanted to raise your father without the complications that come with serious money." He pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it to reveal financial statements that made my head spin. Morrison Development Corporation was worth over $800 million, and Grandpa, this man eating canned soup in our basement, owned 40% of it. "You're telling me you're worth over $300 million, I whispered. "Closer to 350 with the real estate holdings," he said matter-of-factly. "But I've lived simply because I wanted your father to understand the value of hard work, to build his own character without relying on family money." I stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "That's why you never complained about Brittany's treatment. You were testing Dad. His eyes grew sad. I kept hoping he'd find his backbone, that he'd choose family loyalty over social climbing. I gave him chance after chance to stand up for what was right. He gestured toward the certificates on the wall. I built an empire, Sarah, but I failed to build character in my own son. The betrayal hit me fresh and raw. Dad had thrown away his relationship with his own father for a woman who saw us as obstacles to her perfect life. He'd chosen Brittany's shallow approval over a man who loved him unconditionally. So what happens now? I asked. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, he looked like the strategic businessman he'd always been. Now we see if your father is capable of learning what really matters. But first we need to make some arrangements. He made 3 phone calls that changed everything. The first was to his attorney, setting up a meeting for the next day. The second was to a high-end hotel downtown, securing us a suite for the week. The third was to his business partner, mentioning something about accelerating the timeline for public disclosure. As we packed up the office, I found myself staring at a photograph of Grandpa shaking hands with the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a community center. The plaque read, "Donated by J. Morrison, Community Champion." How many people know who you really are? Very few. My attorney, my business partner, the bank president, a handful of others. I've worked very hard to keep my 2 lives separate. He paused, looking directly at me. But that's about to change. We spent Christmas night in a luxury hotel suite that probably cost more than Dad made in a month. Room service, Egyptian cotton sheets, and a view of the city skyline that reminded me we were no longer the broke homeless family Dad had discarded that morning. But despite the comfortable surroundings, I felt hollow. I keep thinking he'll call, I admitted, over dinner. Apologize and ask us to come home. Grandpa set down his fork and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. He might, sweetheart, but it won't be for the right reasons. When people show you who they are, believe them. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the last 3 years, seeing everything through new eyes. How many times had Grandpa quietly endured Brittany's condescension, knowing he could buy her entire world without thinking twice? How many times had he watched Dad choose social status over family loyalty, hoping his son would remember? The values he'd tried to instill. The next morning brought our first glimpse of what justice might look like. Over breakfast, Grandpa's phone rang constantly. His attorney, his accountant, reporters who'd gotten wind of something big. Apparently, Morrison Development Corporation was about to announce a major expansion, and the media was scrambling to learn more about the mysterious silent partner who'd remained hidden for decades. The business world is smaller than people think, Grandpa explained as he fielded another call. Word travels fast when someone like me decides to step back into the spotlight. By noon, the first news article had been published online. Local development giant reveals mysterious co-founder. It included a photograph of Grandpa from the hotel's business center, looking every inch the successful executive in a tailored suit I'd never seen before. The article mentioned his estimated net worth exceeding $300 million and his decades-long commitment to community development and charitable giving. I watched Grandpa transform before my eyes from the simple old man I'd always known into the powerful businessman he'd hidden from us. But what struck me most was that despite having the resources to destroy Dad financially or socially, he seemed focused on something else entirely. "Revenge isn't about punishment, Sira," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "It's about truth. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who's chosen superficial values over authentic relationships is simply reveal who you really are." The local news picked up the story first. By Tuesday afternoon, Dad's coworkers were texting him links to articles about Joseph Morrison, the mystery millionaire who lived in plain sight. The headlines grew more sensational by the hour. Humble grandfather revealed as business empire builder and local family man's secret fortune shocks community. I watched it unfold from our hotel suite, checking social media obsessively. Dad's Facebook page, which usually featured Brittany's carefully curated family photos, had gone silent. But the comments on the news articles told a different story. Former neighbors, co-workers, and community members were sharing memories of Grandpa's quiet generosity, the Christmas gifts for struggling families, the anonymous scholarship fund at the local high school, the time he paid for Mrs. Henderson's cancer treatments without taking credit. People always knew there was something special about him, read one comment that made my throat tight. Joe Miller helped more families in this town than anyone realized. Now we know why he could afford to be so generous. Wednesday brought the first phone call. Dad's number flashed on my screen at 11 p.m., and my heart hammered as I answered. Sarah. His voice sounded strained, uncertain. We need to talk. Now you want to talk. After throwing us out on Christmas, I didn't know. He stopped himself. Can you meet me somewhere? Just you and me against Grandpa's gentle advice? I agreed to meet Dad at our old diner Thursday morning. He looked terrible. Unshaven, wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago. His eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. The confident man who'd chosen Brittany's approval over family loyalty was nowhere to be seen. I've been reading the articles he started without preamble. All this time he was exactly who he always was, Dad. A good man who loved his family. I kept my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. The only thing that changed was your ability to see it. Dad's face crumpled. Brittany said he was holding us back, that we needed to think about our future, about building something better for the kids. She made it sound like we were being responsible adults. So you chose her judgment over your own father's lifetime of love and sacrifice. I thought I was protecting our financial future, he whispered. The factory's been talking about layoffs, and Brittany's job has good insurance stability for the kids. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered Grandpa eating soup alone in the basement while Brittany served expensive wine to her friends upstairs. He would have helped you, Dad, if you'd just been honest about your financial worries instead of letting her convince you that Grandpa was the problem. Dad's phone buzzed constantly throughout our conversation. Text after text from Brittany, whose pristine social media presence was being destroyed by comments from people who knew the truth. Her friends were distancing themselves now that they realized she'd mistreated one of the wealthiest men in the state. Her company was asking questions about her judgment and character. She's furious, Dad admitted, glancing at his phone. She says the media attention is ruining her reputation, that people are making us look bad by talking about how we treated him. How you treated him, I corrected. This is exactly who she is, Dad. When things get difficult, she blames everyone else and thinks about her image first. But even as I said it, I could see Dad wasn't ready to hear it. He was scared, confused, and desperately looking for a way to fix things without admitting how completely he'd failed. He kept asking about Grandpa's plans and whether there was a way to work this out as a family. What he really wanted to know was whether Grandpa's money could solve his problems. Thursday evening brought an unexpected ally. Madison Brittany's 16-year-old daughter showed up at our hotel. The front desk called up to announce her, and I found her waiting in the lobby, looking nothing like the confident Instagram queen who'd claimed my bedroom. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. For taking your room, for the things my mom said, for laughing when she was mean to your grandfather. I studied her face, looking for manipulation or ulterior motives, but found only genuine shame. My real dad left when I was 10, she continued. Your dad was the first man who ever treated me like I mattered, who helped with homework and came to my school events. But when Mom started talking about how your grandfather was beneath us, I went along with it because I was scared of losing the only stable home I'd ever had. We sat in the hotel's quiet lounge while she told me about the chaos at home. Brittany was in full damage control mode, frantically calling her boss and friends, trying to spin the story in her favor. She was telling everyone that she'd tried to include Grandpa, but he was difficult and antisocial. She was even claiming that we'd kept his wealth secret to make her look bad. She's talking about moving back to her apartment, Madison said. She says your dad deceived her about his family's financial situation, and she feels manipulated. But I know the truth. I watched how she treated you guys, and it was wrong. Madison's revelation gave me the first real satisfaction I'd felt since Christmas. Brittany was experiencing the exact consequence she'd earned: social embarrassment and the collapse of the perfect image she'd worked so hard to create. But more than that, her own daughter was seeing through the manipulation. "What will you do if she leaves?" I asked. "I don't know," Madison admitted. "But I can't pretend anymore that what we did was okay. Your grandfather was nothing but kind to us, and we treated him like garbage because my mom convinced us he wasn't good enough for our new family." That night, I called Grandpa to tell him about Madison's visit. I expected him to be pleased about Brittany's unraveling, but instead he sounded thoughtful. "That young lady has more character than her mother," he said. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, especially at her age. Perhaps some good can come from this situation after all." "What about Dad?" he called, wanting to work things out. "But I think he's more interested in access to your money than making real amends." Grandpa was quiet for a long moment. "Your father is going to have to choose Sarah, not between me and Brittany. That choice has already revealed who he is. He's going to have to choose between the easy path of entitlement and the harder path of earning back trust through genuine change." Friday's newspaper featured a full spread about Morrison Development Corporation's charitable foundation, including a photo of the community center Grandpa had funded. The article mentioned his modest lifestyle despite enormous wealth and quoted community leaders praising his decades of quiet generosity. But what caught my attention was a smaller headline: "Local marketing executive under investigation following social media controversy." Apparently, several of Brittany's colleagues had come forward with complaints about her workplace behavior, and her company was conducting a formal review. The truth was emerging in ways none of us had anticipated, and I was beginning to understand Grandpa's strategy. He wasn't just revealing his wealth. He was letting the community reveal who they really were in response to that knowledge. And what they were revealing about Brittany, about Dad, and about themselves was more powerful than any revenge plot could have been. The question now was whether Dad would learn from this revelation or simply try to profit from it. But given what I'd seen over the past few days, I was beginning to suspect that Grandpa's final test was still coming. What happens when someone proves they'll choose money over everything else? I had a feeling we were about to find out, and I wasn't sure our family would survive the answer. Saturday morning brought the moment of truth. Dad arrived at our hotel with flowers, apologies, and what he thought was a brilliant solution to our family crisis. He'd clearly rehearsed his speech, probably with Brittany coaching him on how to approach his newly wealthy father. I've been thinking he began settling into the suite's expensive furniture like he belonged there. Maybe this is actually a blessing in disguise. With your resources, Dad, we could really build something together. Brittany has connections in marketing, I know, construction from the ground up, and Sierra's got her college degree. We could be a real power family. I watched Grandpa's face remain perfectly neutral as Dad outlined his vision of our partnership. Within minutes, it became clear that Dad saw Grandpa's revelation not as a wake-up call about his values, but as a golden ticket to the lifestyle Brittany had always wanted. "I've already been thinking about investments," Dad continued excitedly. "Maybe a bigger house, something that reflects our real status." Brittany found this amazing place in Riverside Estates, 5 bedrooms, pool, 3-car garage. It would be perfect for entertaining business associates. "Business associates, Grandpa?" asked quietly. "Well, your business associates. Our business associates now that we're working together." The word "our" hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Dad had learned nothing. Instead of recognizing his betrayal and working to rebuild trust, he was already spending money that wasn't his and planning a future that included the woman who'd engineered our exile. "What about Brittany?" I asked, unable to help myself. "Last I heard, she was blaming you for deceiving her about our family's financial situation." Dad's face reddened. "She was just shocked, she felt embarrassed that she didn't know the truth. But once she understands that we're all family now, that we can build something amazing together." She threw us out on Christmas, Dad. She called us dead weight. That was a misunderstanding, he said quickly. She was stressed about the party, worried about making a good impression on her colleagues. When she realizes what we can accomplish together, everything will be different. Grandpa stood up slowly and walked to the window overlooking the city skyline. For a long moment, he just stared out at the buildings below, many of which his company had developed. When he turned back to face us, I saw something I'd never seen before in his gentle eyes. Cold, calculated, disappointment. Son, he said quietly, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. What followed was the most devastating 10 minutes of my father's life. Grandpa methodically dismantled every assumption Dad had made, every rationalization he'd constructed, and every hope he'd harbored about accessing the Morrison fortune. For 45 years, I've watched you struggle and succeed on your own merits. I was proud of the man you became. Someone who worked hard, provided for his family, and understood the value of honest labor. That man would never have thrown his father out on Christmas for embarrassing his wife's dinner party. Dad's face went white as Grandpa continued. The will I signed last week leaves everything to charity and to Serafina's children should she choose to have them. You won't see a penny of Morrison money because you've proven you can't distinguish between love and financial opportunity. But Dad, I made a mistake. You made a choice, Grandpa corrected firmly. And when given the chance to reconsider that choice over the past week, you've doubled down by coming here with investment plans instead of genuine remorse. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Dad's world collapsing. I watched him cycle through denial, anger, and desperate bargaining as the reality hit him. He'd gambled everything on Brittany's vision of social climbing, and lost not just his relationship with his father, but his financial future. There has to be something, Dad pleaded. Some way to fix this. I can make it right with you, with Sierra. We can be a real family again. We were always a real family, Grandpa said sadly. Until you decided we weren't good enough for your new life. Dad's phone buzzed with another text from Brittany. Through his shock, he glanced at it and his face crumpled further. I couldn't see the message, but I could guess its content based on his expression. She's leaving, he whispered. Brittany's taking the kids and moving back to her apartment. She says, I misrepresented my family's situation, and she can't be with someone who lives in denial about his toxic family dynamics. The irony was stunning. Brittany was abandoning him, using the exact same logic she'd used to justify our exile. That family loyalty was less important than social advancement. Dad was experiencing firsthand what he'd put us through, and the recognition in his eyes was heartbreaking to watch. Maybe that's for the best, I said softly. Maybe now you can figure out who you really are when you're not trying to impress someone else. But Dad wasn't ready for that level of self-reflection. Instead, he turned back to Grandpa with desperation in his eyes. If I can prove I've changed, if I can show you that I choose family over money, would you reconsider? Give me another chance. Grandpa studied his son for a long moment, and I saw decades of love warring with profound disappointment. The only thing I want from you, son, is for you to become the man I raised you to be. Not for money, not for inheritance, but because character matters more than wealth. But how do I prove that to you? You don't prove it to me, Grandpa said simply. You prove it to yourself. And then you live with the consequences of who you choose to be. As Dad left the hotel that afternoon, broken and alone, I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. This wasn't the sweet revenge I'd imagined during those cold moments on Christmas morning. This was just sad. A family destroyed by greed and social climbing, leaving wreckage that might never be fully repaired. But as I watched Grandpa straighten his shoulders and return to his correspondence with various charitable organizations, I realized something important. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about truth. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply reveal who people really are when they think they have something to gain. The next 72 hours unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Brittany's departure from Dad's house became neighborhood gossip by Sunday afternoon, complete with a moving truck and heated arguments visible from the street. Her social media went dark after a flood of comments from people who remembered Grandpa's kindness, each one a tiny needle deflating her carefully constructed image. Madison called me Monday morning crying. "Mom's acting like she's the victim in all this," she sobbed through the phone. "She's telling everyone that your family manipulated her, that your grandfather deliberately deceived us about his wealth to make her look bad. She actually said he set a trap for her." I almost laughed at the absurdity. A trap that consisted of being kind and generous while living modestly. She's convinced herself that normal people don't just give away money and help neighbors without wanting something in return. She thinks your grandfather was testing her so he could expose her later. In a way, Brittany was right about the test, but she'd failed it all on her own. Grandpa had simply provided the rope. She'd tied the noose herself. The professional consequences hit her by Tuesday. Her marketing firm, citing concerns about judgment and character following the social media backlash, placed her on administrative leave pending a full review. Several clients had specifically requested she be removed from their accounts after reading about her treatment of a charitable community pillar. It's wild how fast things change when people realize you mistreated someone they respect, Madison observed during our second phone call. Mom's friends won't return her texts, her colleagues are avoiding her, and Tyler's school friends are asking uncomfortable questions about why we threw out a millionaire grandfather. Meanwhile, Dad spiraled deeper into isolation. His co-workers, the same people who'd initially been excited about his connection to Joseph Morrison, grew cold when word spread about Christmas Eve. The factory foreman, whose daughter had received one of Grandpa's anonymous scholarships, made it clear that Dad's prospects for advancement had evaporated along with his family relationships. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor to our hotel suite. Tyler Brittany's 14-year-old son showed up looking scared and confused. Unlike his sister's genuine remorse, his motivation was pure self-preservation. "My friends are saying our family's messed up," he said without preamble. "They're asking why we kicked out a war veteran who donated money to build the community center. Mom says it's all lies, but Madison told me the truth." Tyler's visit revealed the full scope of the social earthquake our exile had triggered. Brittany's attempts to control the narrative were failing because too many people had personal experiences with Grandpa's generosity. The man she'd dismissed as a freeloader was revealed to be the anonymous benefactor behind half the community's charitable projects. "What's going to happen to us?" Tyler asked, his teenage bravado cracking to reveal genuine fear. I looked at this kid who'd smirked from the stairway on Christmas Eve watching us get thrown out and felt an unexpected surge of compassion. He was just a child caught in an adult's web of bad choices. "That depends on what you choose to do now," I told him. "You can follow your mother's example and blame everyone else for the consequences of treating people badly. Or you can learn from this and become someone better." Thursday's newspaper featured a devastating op-ed written by the president of the Community Foundation. Titled "The True Measure of a Man," it detailed Grandpa's 40-year history of quiet philanthropy, while pointedly asking why some people only show respect for generosity when they learn it comes with dollar signs attached. The article didn't mention our family by name, but everyone in town knew exactly who it was about. Friday brought the final domino: Dad's job. The factory announced layoffs, and Dad's name topped the list. His supervisor, a man whose wife had been helped through cancer treatments by Grandpa's anonymous assistants, delivered the news with barely concealed disgust. "Funny how things work out," was all he said. Dad called me that evening from his empty house, his voice hollow with defeat. "They're all gone," he said. "Brittany, Madison, Tyler. The house feels like a tomb. And now the job." His voice cracked. "I've lost everything, Sarah. Everything." "You still have family," I said carefully. "If you want it." "Do I?" After what I did. After choosing that woman over my own father. For the first time since Christmas, I heard something in Dad's voice that sounded like genuine recognition of what he'd destroyed Not self-pity about losing financial opportunities, but real regret about betraying the people who'd loved him unconditionally. That's not for me to decide, I said honestly. That's between you and Grandpa. Saturday morning, I found Grandpa in the hotel's business center working on his laptop with the focused intensity I remembered from watching him help with my homework. But instead of math problems, he was reviewing grant applications for the Community Foundation. 47 requests this quarter, he said without looking up. Single mothers needing childcare assistance, veterans requiring medical support, students seeking educational opportunities. Real problems requiring real solutions. I sat down across from him, watching this man who'd been systematically humiliated by his own family maintain his dignity and purpose through simple acts of service. Dad called last night. I think he's finally starting to understand what he lost. Grandpa's fingers paused over the keyboard. Understanding loss and choosing change are very different things, sweetheart. Your father has understood plenty of things over the years. The question is whether he'll choose to become someone worthy of trust. What would that look like? I don't know, Grandpa admitted. But it would start with him making different choices because they're right, not because they benefit him. It would require him to rebuild his character from the ground up without any guarantee of reward or recognition. As I watched him return to his grant applications, I realized that Grandpa's quiet work represented everything Dad had failed to understand about true success. Money was just a tool. Character was the foundation. And no amount of wealth could purchase the respect that came from decades of choosing kindness over convenience, service over self-interest. The collapse was complete, but the real question remained: what would rise from the ashes? 3 months later, I sat in the community center Grandpa had anonymously funded, watching him teach chess to a group of local kids. The weathered hands that had built an empire now patiently guided small fingers across checkered boards just as they'd once guided mine. Some things I realized were more valuable than money could ever measure. Dad had been attending these sessions for 6 weeks, initially hovering awkwardly at the edges before gradually being accepted back into Grandpa's orbit. Not as a son seeking inheritance, but as a man trying to rebuild himself through service to others. He helped set up chairs, cleaned up afterward, and slowly earned back tiny fragments of trust through consistent, humble actions. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or movie-like. There was no tearful reunion scene or grand gesture of forgiveness. Instead, Dad had quietly enrolled in community college to finish his degree, started volunteering at the food bank, and began therapy to understand how he'd lost sight of his values. He lived alone in a modest apartment, drove his old Honda again, and seemed to be discovering who he was when he wasn't trying to impress anyone. It's like watching someone wake up from a long sleep, Madison observed. She'd chosen to stay with her father rather than move back with Brittany, and their relationship was slowly healing. He's becoming the person I remember from before Mom convinced him he needed to be someone else. Brittany had moved 3 states away after her marketing firm terminated her employment. Her attempts to rebuild her career were hampered by the reputation that followed her. A woman who'd mistreated a charitable pillar while climbing the social ladder. Her social media presence had dwindled from polished perfection to bitter posts about family manipulation and orchestrated revenge plots that only served to reinforce people's negative opinions. She still doesn't understand, Tyler said during one of his weekend visits. Unlike his mother, he'd chosen accountability over victimhood and was slowly rebuilding his relationship with Dad. She thinks Grandpa Joe planned all this to hurt her instead of accepting that her own choices had consequences. The community had rallied around Grandpa once his identity became public. The quiet man they'd respected for decades was now honored openly, with the mayor presenting him a key to the city and local organizations lining up to express their gratitude. But what struck me most was how little any of it seemed to matter to him. He accepted recognition graciously, but remained focused on the work itself, helping people, solving problems, making differences that could be measured in changed lives rather than newspaper headlines. Recognition feels good, he told me one evening as we walked through the neighborhood where he'd once lived invisibly among working families, but it was never the point. The point was always the work itself, the knowledge that resources should flow toward need rather than accumulating in accounts. I'd started working for the foundation, learning to evaluate grants and manage charitable programs. The work gave me purpose I'd never found in my previous jobs, and I was beginning to understand why Grandpa had hidden his wealth for so long. Money changed how people saw you, how they interacted with you, and often prevented the authentic relationships that made life meaningful. You could have bought a mansion and surrounded yourself with people who wanted your fortune, I said. Instead, you chose a basement room and a family who loved you for who you were. And I learned which was which, he replied with that quiet smile I'd come to associate with hard-won wisdom. Dad approached us hesitantly, still uncertain of his welcome despite months of proving himself through actions rather than words. The chess tournament raised $1,200 for the scholarship fund, he reported, his voice carrying pride in accomplishment rather than entitlement. That's wonderful, Grandpa said, and I heard genuine pleasure in his voice. 24 kids will get summer camp scholarships because of that effort. These small moments of connection were how trust was rebuilt. Not through grand gestures or emotional speeches, but through consistent choices to prioritize service over self-interest. Dad was learning to find satisfaction in helping others rather than advancing himself and slowly becoming someone worth respecting again. The legal arrangements remained unchanged. Grandpa's will still directed his fortune toward charity and my future children, if any. Dad would inherit nothing financial, but was slowly reclaiming something more valuable: his father's respect and his own self-worth. The money had been a test he'd failed, but character was a test he could retake every day through his choices. Madison graduated high school and chose a college with a strong social work program inspired by watching Grandpa's foundation change lives. Tyler had become one of Grandpa's chess students and was learning that winning through strategy and patience was more satisfying than taking shortcuts. Both kids were finding their own paths, away from their mother's materialistic values. "Do you think Dad will ever fully earn back your trust?" I asked Grandpa one day as we reviewed foundation business. "Trust isn't something you earn back," he said thoughtfully. "It's something you build fresh through new choices. Your father isn't trying to return to who he was before Brittany. He's trying to become someone better. That's more valuable than recovering lost ground." As the sun set over the community center that evening, I watched Dad help a struggling student with a difficult chess move, the same patience and kindness I remembered from my own childhood finally returning. The man who'd thrown us out on Christmas was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that character mattered more than status, that service brought more satisfaction than success. The story had become a local legend. The humble grandfather revealed as a secret philanthropist, the family torn apart by greed and rebuilt through service. But living inside it felt less dramatic, more like the quiet work of growing into better versions of ourselves. So let me ask you, have you ever experienced family karma like this, when someone's true character was revealed through crisis? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life family drama stories and share this video with anyone who believes that character matters more than wealth. Thank you for listening to my family's journey through betrayal to redemption, and remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, regardless of who chooses to walk away from your authentic self.